dust devils danced down the single sun-bleached street of Silver Creek, a town clinging to life between a merciless sun and the shadow of the unforgiving mountains. Thaddeus Big Jack Calloway stood before the polished oak desk of the Silver Creek Bank, his own shadow falling long and broad across the floorboards. The air inside was cool and smelled of paper and old money, a scent as foreign to him as the silk vest worn by the man sitting opposite. Silas Blackwood, the bank's owner and the most powerful land baron in the territory, steepled his fingers, a faint, condescending smile playing on his lips. He was a man built of sharp angles and tailored cloth, his presence a stark contrast to Thaddeus's solid homespun utility. Mr. Calloway Blackwood began, his voice smooth as riverstone. I have reviewed your application for a loan to purchase seed and livestock. While I admire your ambition, the board and I have concluded that your homestead lacks the requisite collateral for such a significant investment. Thaddeus kept his face impassive, a skill honed over years of hardship. My land is good. The deed is clear. I've worked it for 5 years, built it from nothing. Indeed. Blackwood's smile widened, but it didn't reach his cold, calculating eyes. A testament to your perseverance. However, perseverance doesn't guarantee a successful harvest, does it? A late frost, a summer drought, a cattle plague? This is a volatile territory. The bank requires more than a simple deed and a prayer. The dismissal was as public as it was pointed. The bank was small, and every clerk and customer had stopped their business to listen. Thaddeus felt their stares like pinpricks on his skin. He had come here not as a beggar, but as a man of property seeking a business arrangement, yet Blackwood was painting him as a charity case. I'm not asking for a handout. Thaddeus said, his voice a low rumble. Just a fair chance. Fairness, Blackwood mused, leaning back in his leather chair, is a luxury few can afford, Mr. Calloway. Perhaps you should consider a more manageable enterprise. Or perhaps sell your claim. I understand there are investors back east with an interest in acquiring promising tracts of land. I could even facilitate such a sale. It would be a tidy sum, far more than you could hope to earn in a decade of farming. The unspoken threat hung in the air. This wasn't just a loan denial. It was an offer, an order wrapped in polite language. Blackwood wanted his land. Thaddeus's hands, resting on the brim of his hat, curled into fists. He had poured 5 years of sweat, blood, and loneliness into that homestead. It was the only thing he had ever truly built, and the only place he felt the ghosts of his past recede. He would not sell. The homestead is not for sale. He stated his tone, leaving no room for negotiation. He turned the eyes of the townsfolk, following his every move as he strode toward the door. The public humiliation burned hotter than any Montana sun. As he pushed the heavy door open, a woman stepping down from the newly arrived stagecoach stumbled directly into his path. The collision was gentle, but enough to send her reticule and a small parcel flying. Thaddeus, his reflexes still sharp, caught the parcel before it hit the dusty boardwalk. The woman, however, cried out in dismay as a silver locket jarred loose from her neck, clattered to the ground. It had broken open upon impact. Oh my. She whispered, her voice a soft, cultured sound, so different from the rough tones of the frontier. Thaddeus bent to retrieve it, his large, calloused fingers clumsy against the delicate silver. He meant to simply hand it back, to mutter an apology and be on his way. But the image inside the locket froze him in place. It was a daguerreotype of a young man, barely more than a boy, in a Union Army uniform. His smile was hopeful, his eyes bright, with a life not yet touched by the horrors of war. And Thaddeus knew him. He knew that face as well as he knew his own. The shock was a physical blow, a phantom bullet tearing through him all over again. The dust of the street, the murmur of the town, the sting of Blackwood's rejection. It all faded away, replaced by the acrid smell of gunpowder and the roar of cannons. "Are you all right, sir?" The woman's voice pulled him back from the precipice of memory. He looked up from the photograph, into her face. She was plainly dressed in a dark blue traveling gown, her brown hair pulled back severely, but her gray eyes were wide with concern. There was a fragile, guarded quality about her, as if she were braced for a blow. Thaddeus straightened the locket, feeling impossibly heavy in his palm. He held it out to her. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. It's broken." "It was my brother's," she said, her voice catching. He died in the war." Thaddeus's gaze flickered from her face, back to the image of the smiling soldier. Private Daniel Turner. A boy from Boston who'd shared his hardtack and his dreams of home right up until the day the world ended at Antietam. An old familiar pain buried for years under layers of hard work and solitude, twisted in his gut. He didn't know this woman yet. He was irrevocably tied to her deepest sorrow. He had been there when her brother fell. He had been the one who survived. He closed his hand around the broken locket, the sharp edges digging into his skin. He couldn't tell her. Not here, not now. But the secret was a sudden, crushing weight. He had come to town for a loan and left with a ghost. Knew a man who wore that uniform, he said, his voice gruff to hide the tremor of emotion, long time ago. He placed the locket into her gloved hand, his touch lingering for a fraction of a second. Her eyes searched his full of questions he couldn't answer. Behind them, Silas Blackwood appeared in the doorway of the bank, watching the exchange with a predatory stillness. Thaddeus felt the man's gaze on his back, a cold premonition that the fight for his land and the ghosts of his past were about to become dangerously intertwined. The woman clutched the broken locket, her knuckles white. I am Abigail Turner. I'm here to meet a Mr. Calloway." Thaddeus's world tilted on its axis for the second time in as many minutes. The mail-order bride. The practical woman whose honest letter had offered a sliver of hope in his solitary existence. He had expected a stranger. He had not expected the sister of the boy who haunted his nightmares. "I'm Thaddeus Calloway," he said, the words feeling like stones in his mouth. "Looks like we have things to discuss." He glanced over his shoulder at Blackwood, whose smile had returned sharper and more knowing than before. It was the smile of a man who senses weakness and knows just where to press. In that moment, Thaddeus understood. The fight for his future had just begun, and it was tangled in a past he could never escape. The silence on the wagon ride to the homestead was as vast as the landscape itself. Abigail Turner sat stiffly on the wooden seat, her hands clutching the reticule that held Thaddeus Calloway's terse letter and her own broken locket. The man beside her was a fortress of quiet intensity, his large hands guiding the massive draft horses with an economy of motion that spoke of long practice. He was bigger than she had imagined, his shoulders straining the seams of his flannel shirt, his face a rugged map carved by sun and wind. He was nothing like Charles Whitmore, and for that she was strangely grateful. "Town's small," he said finally, his voice a deep baritone that seemed to vibrate through the wagon seat. "But the folks are decent. Mostly." The qualification hung in the air. Abigail thought of the well-dressed man in the bank doorway, the one whose cold eyes had raked over her with an unnerving possessiveness. "Is there trouble in Silver Creek, Mr. Calloway?" "Call me Thaddeus." He kept his eyes on the road ahead, a winding track that climbed steadily into the foothills. "And there's trouble everywhere, Miss Turner. Just comes in different forms. Man named Silas Blackwood runs the town, owns the bank, the hotel, half the businesses. Buys up land from folks who fall on hard times." "Is that what happened at the bank?" she asked, emboldened by his directness. "You seemed displeased." A muscle worked in his jaw. "He denied my loan, made a show of it." He paused. "He wants my land." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of a declaration of war. Abigail looked out at the towering pines and rocky outcroppings, a world of wild, untamed beauty, so different from Boston's ordered streets. This was the life he had built, the life he was now fighting to protect. And she, a stranger, had just agreed to become part of it. The homestead's about 8 miles up. He continued, shifting the topic. Good land. Sheltered valley stream runs year-round. House is solid. Built it myself. The quiet pride in his voice was unmistakable. This was a man who made things with his own hands, who wrested a living from the unforgiving earth. In Boston, a man's worth was measured by his family name and the contents of his bank account. Here, it seemed, it was measured by the strength of his will and the straightness of his walls. She risked a glance at his profile. There were lines of sorrow etched around his eyes, a hardness to his mouth that spoke of a difficult past. His reaction to her brother's photograph had been too visceral to be a simple coincidence. He knew more than he was letting on. Mr. Calloway. Thaddeus, she began, her voice gaining strength. The man in the locket. My brother Daniel. You said you knew a man who wore that uniform. His hands tightened on the reins. The war was a long time ago. A man sees a lot of faces. It was a clear dismissal, a door closed firmly in her face. But Abigail was no longer the timid woman who accepted polite evasions. Her journey west had stripped away layers of social convention, leaving a core of resilient curiosity. He was with the 20th Massachusetts Infantry. He died at Antietam. Thaddeus flinched, a barely perceptible movement, but she saw it. He did not reply, urging the horses onward. The wagon wheels ground over stones, the sound echoing in the heavy silence. They rounded a bend, and the valley opened up before them. The homestead was nestled in a hollow, where the pines whispered secrets to the wind, and a stream cut through the land like a silver ribbon. A sturdy log cabin sat in a natural clearing, smoke curling from its stone chimney in a welcoming plume. A barn, a workshop, and other outbuildings stood nearby, all constructed with the same practical, enduring craftsmanship. A vegetable garden showing the brown stubble of the season's final harvest lay neat and tidy. But it was the single rocking chair on the front porch that caught her eye. It was hand-carved, its lines smooth, and inviting a solitary sentinel waiting for a companion. Something about that lonely chair made her throat ache. It spoke of long evenings and quiet contemplation of a man who had built a home, but had no one to share it with. As the wagon rolled to a stop, Thaddeus climbed down, his movements stiff. He turned to help her, his hands strong and sure as they circled her waist to lift her to the ground. For a moment, they stood close, the scent of pine and sawdust clinging to him. His dark eyes, nearly black, held an intensity that seemed to see straight through her carefully constructed composure to the frightened, hopeful woman beneath. Before we go inside, Miss Turner, he said, his voice low and serious, there's something you need to know. Her heart hammered against her ribs. He was going to send her back. Her honest letter about her inability to have children, his own troubles with Blackwood, the ghost of her brother, standing between them, it was all too much. In your letter, he began, his gaze unwavering. You told me about your condition, about why your engagement in Boston ended. Yes, she whispered, bracing herself. I cannot promise you children. The doctor was quite certain. Doctors can be wrong, he said, a surprising gentleness in his tone. But that's not what I'm concerned about. The life out here. It's hard. It's lonely. Blackwood won't stop at denying a loan. He'll try to break me. He'll use any weakness he can find. He paused, and the weight of his next words settled between them. Are you strong enough for that fight, Abigail? Because marrying me means marrying my troubles. It was not the question she had expected. He wasn't asking about her womb. He was asking about her will. He wasn't focused on what her body couldn't do, but on what her spirit was prepared to endure. She looked from his earnest, worried face to the solid cabin he had built, to the solitary rocking chair on the porch. Back in Boston, she had been defined by her failure, a piece of defective merchandise returned to the shelf. Here, this mountain of a man, was offering her not just a home, but a partnership. A place in his foxhole. "My brother Daniel," she said, her voice finding a new strength, used to write to me about courage. He said it wasn't about not being afraid. It was about doing what was right, even when you were terrified. She met Thaddeus's gaze directly. "I am tired of being afraid, Mr. Calloway. And I am not afraid of hard work or a fight." A flicker of something relief, admiration passed through his dark eyes. The hardness around his mouth softened almost imperceptibly. "There's one more thing," he said, reaching into his coat pocket. He pulled out a small folded piece of oilcloth. Inside was a tarnished silver medal, the Congressional Medal of Honor. "I don't talk about the war, but you deserve to know who you're tying your life to. I was your brother's sergeant." The breath left Abigail's body in a rush. You knew him." "I knew him." The confirmation was heavy with unspoken grief. He was a good soldier, a brave man. He wouldn't meet her eyes. I was with him at the end. He asked me to. He made me promise things. The world spun, the scent of pine suddenly overwhelming. Her brother's commander, the man who had witnessed his last moments. It was too much to comprehend. "What did he ask you?" "That's a story for another time." He folded the oilcloth and put the medal away, burying the past once more. "Right now, I have to ask you one question. The only one that matters." He took a step closer, his presence commanding the space between them. "This life, it's going to be a struggle. Blackwood will try to take this land. The winters are long. There might not be children. Knowing all that, are you still willing to build something here with me?" The question was raw and honest. He offered no flowery promises, no guarantees of an easy life. He offered only himself, his home, and his fight. It was more than Charles Whitmore, with all his wealth and social standing, had ever put on the table. Abigail looked at the solid house built to withstand the harshest storms, and she saw a reflection of the man who stood before her. She had come west seeking a refuge, a last chance at a family. She was beginning to understand she had found something more, a chance to become the woman her brother had always believed she could be. "Yes," she said, the word clear and steady in the mountain air. "I am." Thaddeus nodded once, a gesture of solemn acceptance. A pact had been made. He picked up her worn carpet bag as if it weighed nothing. Then, "Welcome home, Abigail." As they walked toward the cabin, Abigail noticed a second newly finished rocking chair sitting just inside the workshop door, its pale, unscuffed wood waiting to be placed on the porch. It seemed Thaddeus Calloway, for all his gruff pragmatism, was a man who dared to hope. The first weeks of their marriage were a careful dance of discovery. They were wed by Pastor Williams, a traveling preacher in Silver Creek's modest church. Martha and Pete Henderson, the proprietors of the general store, stood as their witnesses. The ceremony was simple, their vows spoken with a solemnity that acknowledged the gravity of their undertaking. Thaddeus was unfailingly courteous, a man who kept his promises, yet a wall of shared grief and unspoken truths stood between them. Abigail threw herself into the work of the homestead, her hands once soft from city living, quickly blistering and then hardening. She learned the rhythms of the wood-burning stove, the particular ache in her back from weeding the garden, the deep satisfaction of seeing shelves lined with preserves she had put up herself. They worked alongside each other, a silent team united against the coming winter. Thaddeus watched her, his expression unreadable. He saw her determination, her refusal to complain about the back-breaking labor. He saw the way she transformed the sparse masculine cabin into a home, adding small touches, wildflowers in a jar, simple curtains sewn from flour sacks that softened the rough-hewn edges of his life. He found himself listening for the sound of her movements in the morning, the quiet competence with which she moved about the kitchen. The loneliness that had been his constant companion for 5 years began to recede, replaced by a tentative, unfamiliar warmth. Their conversations were practical, revolving around chores and supplies. But Abigail was searching for a way through his reserve, a key to unlock the story of her brother's final moments. One evening, as they sat by the fire, she opened her broken locket. "I would like to have this repaired," she said, tracing the fractured silver. "But I don't know if anyone in Silver Creek does such work." Thaddeus looked at the locket, his jaw tight. "I can fix it. I have the tools." "Would you?" she asked, her voice soft. "It's the only photograph I have of him." He took the locket from her, his large fingers surprisingly gentle. He didn't speak for a long time, studying Daniel's smiling face. "He talked about you all the time," he said finally, his voice thick with memory. "Said you were the smart one. The one who could do anything she set her mind to. He was proud of you." Tears pricked Abigail's eyes. "He was my hero." "He was a hero to a lot of men," Thaddeus confirmed. He still wouldn't tell her more, but it was a start, a crack in the wall. The first real threat from Blackwood came a month later. Thaddeus was in town selling a few cords of wood when one of Blackwood's hired hands, a belligerent man named Jed, blocked his path. "Heard you're settling in with a mail order wife." Calloway, Jed sneered, his words slurring with whiskey. "Blackwood says a man with a new family needs security. Says he'd still be willing to buy your claim. Save you the trouble of getting starved out this winter. Tell Blackwood my family and I are doing just fine." Thaddeus replied, his voice dangerously calm. "Is that so?" Jed shoved Thaddeus's shoulder. "Maybe your new wife would prefer a man who can provide for her. A man with real money, not just a patch of dirt and a pile of debts." The insult to Abigail was a line crossed. Thaddeus moved faster than a man his size should be able to. He didn't throw a punch. He simply grabbed the front of Jed's shirt, lifted him 6 inches off the ground, and pinned him against the wall of the general store. "You will not speak of my wife again." Thaddeus said each word a chip of ice. "You will tell your boss that the next time he sends a message, he should have the courage to deliver it himself. Do you understand me?" Jed, his face pale with fear, nodded frantically. Thaddeus released him, and the man scrambled away like a scalded dog. But the encounter left a bitter taste in Thaddeus's mouth. This was just the beginning. Blackwood was testing his defenses, probing for weaknesses. When he returned to the homestead, Abigail could see the storm in his eyes. He told her what happened, his words clipped and angry. Instead of fear, she felt a surge of indignation. "He thinks he can intimidate us," she said, her hands on her hips. "He thinks because we're small, we're weak. He has money and influence, Abigail. That makes him strong." "No," she countered, her gray eyes flashing with a fire he hadn't seen before. "It makes him a bully. And bullies only win when you let them." She went to the small writing desk she had set up in a corner of the cabin. "I'm going to start looking into the land deeds in this territory. The laws. There must be protections for homesteaders." He watched her, a newfound respect dawning in his eyes. She wasn't just a partner in labor. She was a partner in his fight. She was the smart one, just as Daniel had said. The following week, while searching for an old ledger in Thaddeus's army footlocker, Abigail found it. Tucked inside a worn leather pouch with his Medal of Honor was a small folded map drawn on oiled canvas. It was old, the ink faded, but it clearly depicted their valley. There were strange symbols and what looked like coded notations along the creek bed. Wrapped with the map was a letter, the handwriting shaky but familiar. It was from Daniel. "Sergeant Calloway." It began. "If you are reading this, then I did not make it. I trust you with this map because you are an honorable man. The claim is sound. I surveyed it myself before enlisting. The symbols are a cipher we used as boys. My sister Abigail knows the key. It's from the book of poems Mother used to read to us. Tell her to look to the whispering pines. The gold will set her up for life. Keep her safe. That is my final order to you. Don't let my sacrifice be for nothing. My partner in this venture, his name is Silas. be wary of him. He is a man ruled by greed. Abigail's hands trembled as she read the words. Gold, a secret cipher, and a partner named Silas. Silas Blackwood. The floor seemed to drop out from beneath her. This wasn't just about land. It was about a hidden treasure, a secret her brother had died to protect. Blackwood wasn't trying to buy their homestead. He was trying to reclaim the prize he had been denied by Daniel's death. Thaddeus came in from the barn, stamping the autumn chill from his boots. He saw the map and the letter in her hands, saw the look on her face, and he knew. "What is it?" he asked, his voice hushed. "It's everything," she whispered, handing him the letter. He read it, his face turning to stone. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Blackwood's unusual interest in his specific parcel of land, his veiled threats, his connection to the war. He wasn't just a greedy land baron. He was a man with a dark personal connection to their lives, a man who had likely betrayed her brother. And Thaddeus, the sole witness to Daniel Turner's last moments, was the only person standing in his way. The fight for the homestead had just become a fight for their lives. The whispers of the past were no longer echoes. They were a battle cry. The discovery of the map transformed the tenor of their lives. The threat from Blackwood was no longer a vague cloud on the horizon. It was a physical presence, a secret buried beneath their feet. They spoke of it in hushed tones after dark. The coded map spread on the kitchen table between them. Daniel's last words, a ghostly testament to his partner's treachery. Whispering Pines. Abigail murmured one evening, her finger tracing the title of a worn book of poetry she had brought from Boston. It was her mother's favorite, filled with verses she knew by heart. It was his favorite poem. He said it reminded him of home. Together, they bent over the map, using the poem as a key. The first letter of each line corresponded to a symbol on the map. Slowly, painstakingly, a new set of instructions emerged from the cryptic markings. A specific bend in the creek. A rock formation that looked like a sleeping bear. A directive to measure 50 paces north from the oldest pine. He found it. Thaddeus said, his voice filled with awe and sorrow. The boy actually found a producing vein. And Blackwood knew. Abigail added, her heart cold. Daniel must have written to him from the war, told him about the claim. Blackwood was supposed to be his partner, a partner who never showed up. Thaddeus finished grimly. He waited. He knew Daniel was at Antietam. He must have assumed he could just come west and claim it for himself after the battle. But he didn't count on you, Abigail said, looking at him. Daniel gave you the map. He trusted you. The weight of that trust settled heavily on Thaddeus's shoulders. He was not just protecting his home now. He was guarding a dead friend's legacy, protecting that friend's sister from the man who had wronged them both. His recurring nightmares of the war intensified, no longer just fragmented images of battle, but now featuring Blackwood's smiling, predatory face looming in the smoke. Their first obstacle was confirming the claim without alerting Blackwood. Thaddeus spent 2 days working near the creek, ostensibly clearing brush, but secretly following the map's instructions. He found the spot, a small, cleverly concealed opening behind a curtain of rock and roots. Inside, the quartz vein glittered with unmistakable flecks of gold. It was real. Their second obstacle was time. Winter was closing in. The first snows had already dusted the high peaks. Once the valley was snowed in, they would be isolated, cut off from town, and vulnerable. Blackwood knew this. He would make his move before the heavy snows fell. Blackwood's pressure intensified. He couldn't risk a legal challenge that might bring surveyors and unwanted attention to the land, so he resorted to a campaign of harassment. Fences were cut in the night, allowing their 2 milk cows to wander. Their well was fouled with a dead animal, forcing Thaddeus to spend a day cleaning it. Small acts of malice designed to wear them down, to make them feel unsafe in their own home. One afternoon, Abigail rode to town for supplies. As she was leaving the general store, Blackwood cornered her, his manner oozing false sympathy. "Mrs. Calloway," he said, tipping his hat, "I hear you've been having some difficulties up at the homestead. Such a shame. This is no country for a woman of your refinement." "We are managing just fine, Mr. Blackwood," she replied, her chin high. "Are you?" His eyes bored into hers. "Some men carry ghosts, you know. They bring the battlefield home with them. It can make them reckless, unreliable. A woman like you, a future mother, perhaps you need stability. Security." His gaze dropped meaningfully to her abdomen. "A man like your husband, a man with his past. He cannot offer you that." The veiled threat, coupled with the intimate, presumptuous glance, sent a chill down her spine. He was trying to poison her mind against Thaddeus, to use his trauma as a weapon. "My husband is an honorable man," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "More honorable than you could ever comprehend." She turned and walked away, but his soft laughter followed her down the street. That night, she told Thaddeus about the encounter. "He knows something about you, Thaddeus, about the war, about Daniel. He was trying to frighten me." Thaddeus's face was grim in the firelight. "There's more to the story of Antietam, something I never told anyone." He took a deep breath, the confession he had held back for years, finally rising to the surface. Blackwood was there. Abigail stared at him, uncomprehending. "What? But he wasn't a soldier. No. He was a sutler, a civilian contractor selling provisions to the army, a war profiteer. He followed the camps, making a fortune off the men. Daniel recognized him from back east. That's how he knew him. On the morning of the battle, Blackwood was near our lines. Daniel confronted him. I didn't hear it all, but it was about the gold claim. Daniel was accusing him of something, of trying to cheat him. The fire crackled, the only sound in the room. Then the shelling started. Thaddeus continued, his voice barely a whisper. It was chaos. When the charge came, Daniel was hit. I was beside him. As he was going down, he saw Blackwood watching from the sutler's wagon, just watching with his cold, satisfied look on his face. Daniel knew. He knew Blackwood was leaving him to die, that he'd go west and steal the claim. He looked at Abigail, his eyes full of a decade of guilt. That's when he gave me the map. He made me swear I would find you, that I would protect you and his legacy from that man. I tried to find you after the war, but your family had moved. I thought I'd failed him. The full, monstrous truth settled over them. Blackwood hadn't just betrayed Daniel. He had watched him die content to let a Confederate bullet do his dirty work. And now, 10 years later, the last two people who could expose him were living on top of the very treasure he sought. He won't stop, Abigail, Thaddeus said, his voice heavy. As long as we're on this land, as long as I'm alive to tell what I saw, we're a threat to him. He will come for us. They were no longer just defending a homestead. They were standing vigil over a grave, holding the line for a man whose last wish had been for justice. The mountain winds howled outside the cabin, sounding like a rising storm. It was a fitting sound, for the tempest they had dreaded was about to break. The storm hit the valley with the force of a physical assault. Rain came in blinding horizontal sheets, and the wind shrieked through the pines like a vengeful spirit. Inside the cabin, every gust of wind felt like a fist pounding on the walls. The flickering lantern light cast long, dancing shadows that turned familiar objects into monstrous shapes. James, now a sturdy toddler of nearly 2, slept fitfully in his crib, while their newborn daughter Margaret was a warm, trusting bundle in Abigail's arms. Thaddeus stood by the window, peering into the maelstrom. He had been restless all evening, his instincts on high alert. He'll use the storm as cover, he said, his voice a low growl. No one from town will be able to ride up here in this. We're on our own. Abigail's heart pounded in rhythm with the thunder that cracked overhead, shaking the very foundations of the cabin. She looked at her husband, his broad back, a bulwark against the chaos outside, and at her sleeping children. Everything she loved in the world was within these four walls. We knew he would come. She said, her voice steadier than she felt. We're ready. They had spent the past weeks preparing. Thaddeus had reinforced the doors and windows, and his rifle, cleaned and loaded, leaned against the wall near the hearth. Abigail had packed a small bag with essentials for the children, just in case. They were not victims waiting for a predator. They were soldiers defending their fortress. The sound, when it came, was almost lost in the roar of the wind, the splintering of wood from the direction of the barn. Thaddeus didn't hesitate. He grabbed his rifle and a spare box of cartridges. Stay here. Bar the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone but me. Thaddeus, no Abigail, cried, her fear a cold knot in her stomach. Don't go out there. That's what he wants. He's trying to draw me out to separate us, he agreed, his eyes hard as flint. But I can't let him burn down everything we've built. He cupped her face in his free hand, his thumb stroking her cheek. I will come back, Abigail. I swear it. He slipped out into the storm, and she slammed the heavy bar across the door, her hands trembling. The cabin, which had always felt like a sanctuary, now felt like a trap. Moments later, a horrifying sound reached her, a single gunshot, sharp and clear, even over the din of the storm. It was followed by a profound, terrifying silence. Thaddeus, she whispered to the empty room. The front door rattled, a heavy fist pounding against the wood. Abigail, a voice called. It's Silas Blackwood. Your husband has been injured. Let me in, for God's sake. He needs help. Panic warred with suspicion. Was it a trick, or was Thaddeus truly lying wounded in the mud and rain? Open the door. Abigail Blackwood's voice was slick with false urgency. There's no time to waste. Her mind raced. Thaddeus was strong a survivor. But Blackwood was ruthless. She looked at the rifle her husband had left propped by the door, a smaller model he had taught her to use for hunting small game. With one hand still holding her sleeping baby, she crept to the window, peering through a small gap in the curtains. She could just make out a figure huddled on the porch steps. But it wasn't Thaddeus. It was one of Blackwood's hired men feigning injury. And standing just out of sight, pressed against the cabin wall, was Blackwood himself, a pistol in his hand. It was a trap. Her blood ran cold. The gunshot had not been aimed at Thaddeus. It had been a lure for her. The pounding on the door grew more insistent. Abigail, for the love of God, open this door. She backed away from the window, her mind clear and sharp with terror. She laid Margaret gently in the crib beside James, who was beginning to stir. She picked up the rifle. It was heavy in her hands, but the feel of the cold steel was reassuring. She was not just a wife and mother. She was a soldier in this war, too. Suddenly, the back window shattered, and a man began to climb through. Without a second thought, Abigail raised the rifle and fired. The blast was deafening in the small cabin. The man yelped and fell back outside. The ruse was over. The direct assault had begun. Blackwood's voice, no longer feigning concern, roared from the front porch. You foolish woman, I offered you a civilized life. Now you'll die here in the dirt with him. Gunshots erupted from two sides of the cabin as Blackwood and his men opened fire, the bullets thudding into the thick log walls. Abigail threw herself to the floor, crawling toward the crib, shielding her children with her body, just as despair began to set in. A new sound joined the fray, a shotgun blast from the direction of the barn, followed by a man's scream of pain. Thaddeus. He hadn't been shot. He had outsmarted them, circling around through the storm to come at them from behind. The firefight was now a chaotic three-way battle. Thaddeus, pinned down in the barn, was exchanging fire with Blackwood on the porch and his remaining man at the back of the house. An eerie lull fell as the combatants reloaded. In the sudden quiet, Blackwood's voice cut through the wind. Calloway, you can't win. Give me the map and I'll let the woman and children live. You're a liar, Blackwood, Thaddeus yelled back. just like you were at Antietam." Antietam Blackwood laughed a chilling, unhinged sound. "You still think about that Daniel Turner was a fool. He trusted me. He thought his little map was a secret between partners. Did you know he didn't die on the battlefield Callaway? Your noble sergeant's memory is a bit fuzzy." A new horror crept into the room. Abigail pushed herself up, straining to hear. "He survived the battle." Blackwood shouted gleefully, his voice carrying on the wind. "Wounded but alive. I found him in a field hospital a month later. He was recovering, writing a letter to his dear sister." Blackwood's voice dripped with mockery. "He was going to expose me, so I had to quiet him." A pillow over the face is a silent thing. No one suspected. They thought it was the fever that took him. "I murdered him, Callaway. I killed him for that map, and now I'll kill you." The revelation was a physical agony, stealing the air from Abigail's lungs. Her brother had survived. He had been alive, recovering only to be murdered in his sickbed by the man who now stood on her porch. All her years of grief had been based on a lie. The pure, unadulterated hatred that filled her was a force of nature as powerful as the storm raging outside. She saw movement at the broken back window. The man she had shot was trying to climb in again. As he struggled over the sill, the front door suddenly burst open, the bars splintering under the force of a heavy blow. Silas Blackwood stood there, rain-soaked and wild-eyed, his pistol aimed directly at her. Time seemed to slow. Abigail saw it all in a flash. Blackwood in the doorway, the henchman at the window, her children crying in their crib. She had only one shot. She didn't aim at Blackwood. She aimed at the lantern hanging from the central beam above his head. She fired. The rifle kicked hard against her shoulder. The lantern exploded, plunging the room into absolute darkness, save for the intermittent flashes of lightning. In the same instant, a massive shape burst through the back of the cabin as Thaddeus, using a fallen log as a battering ram, smashed his way inside. The cabin was a chaos of darkness, wind, and rain. A flash of lightning illuminated Blackwood, his face, a mask of fury turning to fire at the sound of Thaddeus's entrance. Another lightning strike revealed Thaddeus, not with his rifle, but with a woodsman's axe in his hands, charging across the room. The final confrontation was not one of bullets, but of brute primal force. In the storm-racked darkness of the home they had built together, Thaddeus Callaway finally faced the ghost of Antietam, not for revenge, but for justice. The chaos within the cabin was absolute. In the strobing flashes of lightning, the scene was a tableau of violence. Blackwood, momentarily blinded by the darkness, fired his pistol wildly. The bullet whizzed past Thaddeus's head and buried itself in a ceiling beam. The henchman at the window, disoriented, stumbled forward into the room, directly into Thaddeus's path. Thaddeus didn't break stride. He swung the flat of his axe, a single brutal blow that sent the man crashing into the wall, where he crumpled to the floor unconscious. Blackwood fired again. And the muzzle flash, illuminating his face, twisted in a snarl of desperation. Thaddeus felt a searing pain in his left arm, but his momentum carried him forward. He closed the distance between them, bringing the axe handle up under Blackwood's wrist. The pistol clattered to the floor. Lightning flashed again, freezing the two men in a desperate struggle. Blackwood, though wiry, was no match for Thaddeus's raw strength. With a roar that was part rage, part grief, Thaddeus slammed Blackwood against the wall. His forearm pressed hard against the man's throat. "This is for Daniel." Thaddeus snarled, his voice a guttural rasp. "Kill me." Blackwood choked out a strange, triumphant smile on his lips. "Do it. Be the animal they all think you are. It won't bring him back." For a heart-stopping moment, Abigail was sure Thaddeus would do it. She could see the battle raging in his eyes, the soldier's instinct for vengeance warring with the homesteader's desire for peace. His grip tightened, and Blackwood's eyes began to bulge. "No," Abigail said, her voice cutting through the storm's roar. "Don't." Her voice was the anchor he needed. Thaddeus looked from Blackwood's gasping face to his wife, standing protectively before their children's crib, her face pale but resolute in the flickering light from the hearth. He saw not just the woman he loved, but the future they represented, a future built on law and decency, not on bloodshed and revenge. Killing Blackwood would make him no better than the man he despised. It would be a victory for the ghosts, not for the living. With a final shuddering breath, he released the pressure on Blackwood's throat. He didn't kill him. He simply hit him a clean, powerful blow to the jaw that sent the land baron slumping to the floor in an unconscious heap beside his henchman. Justice, not revenge. As if on cue, the storm began to subside. The wind died down to a mournful sigh, and the rain softened to a steady drumming on the roof. The battle was over. Thaddeus stood breathing heavily, the pain in his arm finally registering. He looked at Abigail, a silent question in his eyes. She rushed to him, her hands checking the wound, a deep graze bleeding freely, but not life-threatening. "We need to get this cleaned and bandaged," she said, her voice trembling with the aftermath of adrenaline. As she tore a strip from her petticoat to make a bandage, they heard new sounds outside, the jingle of harnesses and the low voices of men. Headlights cut through the rain-swept darkness. A moment later, Sheriff Brody stood in the splintered doorway, a posse of armed townsmen behind him. He took in the scene, the shattered lantern, the unconscious men on the floor, the axe in Thaddeus's hand, and his eyes widened. "Calloway, what in God's name happened here?" "Blackwood happened," Abigail said, stepping forward. "He and his men attacked us." She reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out a packet of letters wrapped in oilcloth. "I sent my nephew out the back way before the worst of the storm hit. He rode to your office. This is everything. My brother's letters, sworn affidavits from other homesteaders Blackwood has threatened. Proof she had been one step ahead of him all along. While Thaddeus had been preparing for a physical fight, she had been preparing for the legal one, ensuring that even if they died, Blackwood's crimes would not." The sheriff took the packet, his expression shifting from confusion to grim understanding, as he recognized the weight of the evidence in his hands. Months passed. The mountain valley healed under a blanket of winter snow and awoke to the gentle green of spring. Silas Blackwood, tried and convicted on a host of charges from fraud to attempted murder, was now serving a long sentence in the territorial prison at Deer Lodge. His empire had crumbled, his reign of fear over Silver Creek broken. The gold from Daniel's claim was real. A modest but significant vein that provided them with a security they had never imagined. But they did not use it to enrich themselves. After setting aside enough to secure the homestead and their children's futures, they used the rest to establish a trust for the town. Their first project was building a new schoolhouse, a sturdy clapboard building with large windows that let in the mountain light. Above the door, a carved wooden sign read, "The Daniel Turner Memorial School." One warm afternoon in late spring, Abigail found Thaddeus standing before a simple stone marker they had erected on a quiet knoll overlooking the valley. It wasn't a grave, but a place of remembrance for her brother. He didn't hear her approach. He was turning something over and over in his hands. As she drew closer, she saw it was her locket, the one he had taken to repair so long ago. The silver was polished to a brilliant shine, the broken hinge mended so perfectly, the seam was almost invisible. Daniel's smiling face looked out from behind the new glass. Thaddeus gently placed the repaired locket on the headstone, letting it rest against the cool stone. "I should have been the one," he said, his voice thick with an old familiar guilt. He had a sister waiting for him, a future. I had nothing but ghosts. It should have been me. Abigail came to stand beside him, slipping her hand into his. Daniel wouldn't have wanted that. His last letter, his last order to you was to live, to keep me safe, to build something good. She squeezed his hand. You feel guilty for surviving. But you honored him, Thaddeus. You honored him by building a life of integrity, by raising a family, by turning the wealth he discovered into a legacy for this whole community. She rested her head on his shoulder, looking out at the valley that was their home. Their son James was chasing grasshoppers in the meadow below his laughter, carrying on the breeze. In her arms, baby Margaret gurgled contentedly. The homestead was thriving, a testament to their shared labor and love. "You didn't fail him," she whispered. "You fulfilled his dying wish. You brought his sister home." He wrapped his arm around her, pulling her and their daughter close. He looked at the locket gleaming on the stone, then at the schoolhouse in the distance, and finally at the family beside him. The weight of his survivor's guilt, a burden he had carried for more than a decade, finally began to lift, replaced by a profound and quiet peace. The ghosts of Antietam had been laid to rest, not by vengeance, but by a life well lived.